The silence was not empty. It was filled, utterly consumed, by a sound that existed only within the confines of his own chest. It was a percussive cadence, relentless and demanding, a drumming so loud it seemed to warp the very light filtering through the window panes of the executive suite. If a metronome could capture the pace of impending doom, it would tick precisely at this furious, unsustainable rhythm. His heart, Elias knew with chilling certainty, was racing not towards a finish line, but towards a catastrophic structural failure. This was not the gentle flutter of nerves before a first date, nor the exhilarating thump of sudden excitement. This was physiological rebellion, an existential inertia that gripped him and threatened to drag him beneath the surface of reality. The beat was uneven, a dizzying syncopation that skipped and thundered, sending shockwaves of pure adrenaline through his veins, which now felt constricted and icy. His hands, resting ostensibly calm upon the polished mahogany table, a surface reflecting the expensive and meaningless success he had built, were slick with a cold, desperate sweat. He could feel the pulse hammering visibly in the hollow of his neck, a frantic, tiny bird fighting against the cage of his collar, seeking desperate flight. He tried to breathe, to command his diaphragm to draw a deep, grounding draft of air, but the attempt met resistance. It was as if his lungs had shrunk, replaced by fragile, useless sponges, capable only of shallow, panicked gasps. The air in the opulent room, heavy with the scent of expensive leather and polished wood, tasted metallic, acrid, tasting of fear itself. His vision was beginning to narrow, pulling in the edges like a collapsing curtain, leaving him with a sharp, terrifying tunnel focus on the single mundane detail directly ahead. A microscopic imperfection in the grain of the wood, a flaw he had never noticed until now, magnified by the intensity of his terror into a yawning chasm. This was the hook, the inescapable physical manifestation of a psychological debt finally coming due. His body was screaming, using its most powerful muscle to communicate a crisis the meticulous, organized mind had spent a lifetime diligently ignoring. The second hook arrived immediately, compounding the physical agony with intellectual horror. This was his reality, a man meticulously prepared for every professional contingency, now utterly disarmed by his own biology. His internal monologue, usually crisp, sharp, and decisive, had dissolved into a chaotic, recursive loop. Stop it. Stop it. Why won't you stop? He knew academically that this was the activation of the primitive fight-or-flight response, triggered by an ancient alarm system mistakenly identifying the boardroom as a savanna stalked by a predator. But knowing the mechanism offered zero solace, zero reprieve. The rational mind was screaming instructions into a loudspeaker held by a deaf, terrified entity, the limbic system. Contextualization was immediate and sharp. Elias was seated alone in the anteroom, awaiting the official call to enter the main conference chamber where the board waited. Minutes, precious, agonizing minutes, were ticking down until the most critical presentation of his career. A presentation that would either solidify his legacy or expose the fragility of his foundations. The stakes were astronomical. The merger of two multi-billion-dollar entities hinged on his ability to articulate a vision of cohesion and stability. The irony was a cruel whip. He was meant to project absolute control, yet internally, he was a millimeter away from complete disintegration. The sterile, silent environment, the plush carpets, the muted indirect lighting, the heavy sound-dampening materials, only amplified the frantic interior noise, trapping him in a personalized acoustic chamber of dread. The problem, however, was not the board, nor the billions at stake. The fundamental conflict was that this level of anxiety was disproportionate to the external threat. A presentation, no matter how crucial, did not warrant a full-scale systemic shutdown. This was the culmination of years of relentless striving, driven not by ambition, but by a desperate, insatiable need to outrun a past trauma, a profound failure that had hollowed him out 3 years prior. The heart racing wasn't a warning about the future. It was a violent protest against the present, a present built on avoidance. The open loops began to flicker across his mind's eye, fragmented, unbearable memories that fueled the adrenaline surge. He saw, briefly, not the mahogany door of the boardroom, but the bright, unforgiving fluorescent lights of a hospital corridor. He felt the specific, sickening weight of a single, terrible piece of paper held in his hand, a prognosis, and he heard, not the present silence, but the echoes of an unkept promise, a silence that had stretched over the last 3 years, replacing genuine emotion with the relentless pursuit of professional distraction. This specific trauma, tied to a loss that felt like a permanent mutilation of his soul, was the phantom limb that twitched whenever he approached a moment of true visibility or vulnerability. The current crisis wasn't about numbers, it was about the fear that if he succeeded, he would finally have to look back and truly feel the cost of his absence and the guilt he had meticulously buried beneath layers of professional achievement. The development section became an agonizing slow-motion ballet of self-destruction. He tried every technique he had learned from countless self-help books and mindfulness apps. Count backwards from 100. Focus on 5 things you can see, 4 things you can touch. 100, 99. The counting was useless. The number dissolved before it could form, replaced by the thud, thud, thud. He tried to focus on the leather armrest, its smooth, cool texture, but the sensation was drowned out by the tingling, the aggressive pins and needles that began to crawl up his arms and legs, a sure sign of hyperventilation. He realized he was leaning forward, elbows braced on his knees, a posture of containment that was simultaneously suffocating him. He straightened, then immediately slumped again. This was the escalating progression, the realization that the control systems were offline. He wasn't just anxious, he was entering the spiraling vortex of a full-blown panic attack, the body mobilizing for a threat that existed only in the architecture of his memory. The blood pressure must be spiking, the cortisol flooding his system, turning his stomach into a knot of hot, acidic churning. He was certain that if he stood up, he would collapse, an embarrassing, utterly humiliating heap of nerves and tailored Italian wool. Then came the pattern interrupt, a moment of distorted philosophical clarity delivered through the lens of terror. He focused on his watch, a heavy, expensive timepiece. The sweeping second hand seemed to stutter, moving with impossible slowness. Time had dilated. Every second was an epoch, every beat of his heart a monumental gong in a cathedral of personal failure. This physical reality was a profound realization. Fear doesn't just hijack the body, it warps physics itself. He was caught in a moment of excruciating amplified presence, forced to witness his own breakdown second by painful second. He tried to think of his opponent, the ruthless corporate rival who would gladly see him fail, hoping that anger would displace fear. But even that calculated maneuver failed. There was no room for external spite. His entire bandwidth was dedicated to internal survival. He shifted his gaze to the far wall, a vast expanse of textured white paper. He searched desperately for another flaw, another escape route for his attention. He found a subtle seam where 2 panels met, a vertical line running from ceiling to floor. He began mentally tracing it obsessively, meticulously, trying to impose order on the chaos. Straight line, straight line. Focus on the straight line. But the line shimmered, blurring at the edges, and suddenly, the straight line became a symbol of his rigid, controlled existence, an existence that had inevitably snapped under the pressure of suppressed emotion. The momentary visual distraction had worked only to usher in a wave of deeper, more agonizing self-recrimination. The re-engagement arrived, piercing through the fog of symptoms. If your heart is racing, a small, clear voice whispered in the maelstrom of his panic, it is not trying to kill you, it is trying to speak to you. This was the pivot. Elias had always viewed anxiety as the enemy, a weakness to be medicated, mastered, or simply ignored through overwork. Now, trapped, utterly exposed to its brute force, he began to perceive it differently. This racing heart was not random hostility. It was a desperate messenger, a loyal servant of his deepest self, finally resorting to a bullhorn to deliver crucial intelligence. It was screaming, not about the danger of the boardroom, but about the lethal danger of the life he was leading, a life of perpetual performance, divorced from authenticity. The frantic tempo was the sound of his true self beating against the walls of the gilded cage he had constructed. He leaned his head back against the leather seat, eyes squeezed shut, allowing the cacophony to wash over him. He stopped fighting the physiological symptoms for a single, terrifying instant. Instead of asking, "When will this stop?" he asked, "What is the message?" The physical symptoms, momentarily unopposed, intensified. The dizziness peaked. The blood pounded so fiercely in his ears that it sounded like a tidal wave crashing against stone. He felt lightheaded, convinced he was about to lose consciousness, but in that moment of surrender, the internal monologue finally broke through the noise. The climax delivered the great revelation, shattering the carefully constructed facade. The truth wasn't external, it was internal. He wasn't afraid of failing the presentation. He was terrified of succeeding. Success, he realized with cold, sickening clarity, meant more presentations, more exposure, more scrutiny, and critically, more distance from the only thing that had ever truly mattered. The memory of the hospital corridor flooded back, no longer fragmented but whole. 3 years ago, he had been absent, chasing a similar career opportunity, when he received the call that changed everything. The silence of the 3 years that followed was his penance. He had replaced mourning with momentum, ensuring he was too busy, too important, to ever stop and grieve or accept responsibility. The racing heart was the primal fear of stopping. If he stopped running, he would have to face the hollow man underneath the corporate armor. He was terrified that the board, his colleagues, the world would look at him, the successful, prepared Elias, and see the failure he truly believed himself to be, a man who traded presence for promotion and lost everything vital in the exchange. The specific loop closed with brutal finality. The unkept promise was the promise he made to himself and to the lost person, to live a life worthy of the sacrifice. Instead, he had built an elaborate, polished prison of achievement, designed to silence the guilt. The racing heart was not fear of public speaking. It was the heart screaming, "Stop building monuments to your avoidance." The realization was a shock, a sudden, sharp intake of breath that finally managed to fill his lungs past the superficial panic zone. It was a painful moment, one drenched in shame and self-knowledge, but paradoxically, the moment the terror broke. The heart was still sprinting, but the desperate, chaotic edge had softened, replaced by a deep, aching sadness. He had identified the true source of the fire. The conclusion followed quickly. Elias opened his eyes. The room was still there, the mahogany door still closed, but the world no longer felt like a collapsing tunnel. He acknowledged the truth. The crisis was necessary. This physical breakdown was the only way his deepest self could force him to pay attention to the fundamental misalignment of his life. The pain was unbearable, yes, but it was honest pain, not the sterile pain of avoidance. He remained seated, still breathing shallowly, but no longer fighting the tremor in his hands. He heard faintly the sharp electronic chime signaling his readiness. The door was about to open. He was not healed, but he was informed. He was still terrified, but the object of his terror had shifted from the external threat of failure to the internal reality of his own brokenness. This was the beginning of the hearing. He needed to listen through the noise. This journey, this sudden violent confrontation with the deepest, most carefully guarded wound, requires presence above all else. If your heart is racing, you are being commanded to stop fighting the symptoms long enough to receive the intelligence they bear. You must stay here right now in this moment of acute vulnerability. Do not look away. Do not reach for the immediate escape. Hear these words. The racing heart is not the affliction. It is the alarm demanding that you confront the source. And when the door finally opens, when the pressure mounts, you must remain present, absorbing the truth, because the necessary words, the words of healing and restructuring, are yet to come. Listen and prepare to absorb the profound meaning of this moment. It was not merely a beat, it was a detonation, a relentless, deafening rhythm trapped within the confines of the chest cavity, demanding release, defying the very physics of silence. The world outside had dissolved into a secondary concern, a muted backdrop against the primary, terrifying orchestration occurring beneath the ribs. Every pulse was a hammer blow against the inner architecture of the self, pushing against the fragile walls of composure that had taken years to construct. The breath, shallow and jagged, ceased to be a natural function and became a labored, conscious effort, a desperate struggle to pull oxygen into lungs that felt permanently constricted, tied down by the tightening vice of sheer, unadulterated dread. The adrenaline coursed through the veins not as a helpful surge of energy, but as a burning toxin, forcing muscles into rigid contraction, sending tremors down the arms and legs. This was the moment where the body betrayed the mind, where the primal reptilian brain seized control of the vessel. Everything the self knew about logic, about preparation, about the statistical improbability of immediate catastrophe, evaporated under the heat of this internal fever. The awareness sharpened terrifyingly on minute details, the slick coldness of the sweat gathering on the palms, the metallic taste that surfaced on the tongue, the subtle, high-pitched whine that anxiety often imposed over all ambient sound, a psychological tinnitus announcing impending overwhelm. This was the precipice. The heart, in its frantic, almost impossible speed, was not just racing, it was signaling the point of no return, the terminal edge of endurance. The immediate scenario was simple, yet magnified by the internal state into an insurmountable wall. There was a choice pending, a necessary action that required stepping into the unknown, a vulnerability that demanded the shedding of protective layers. But the body screamed halt. The conflict was no longer intellectual. It was purely visceral. One part of the psyche fought desperately for forward motion, recognizing the absolute necessity of crossing the chasm, while the physical system employed every defense mechanism it possessed to immobilize the host, to keep it safe through stagnation. The true conflict was the agonizing distance between the will and the capacity to execute, and yet in the heart of that terrifying, accelerated storm, a peculiar stillness began to bloom. It started not as a calm, but as a surrender to the sheer noise. When the drumming reaches such an unbearable, continuous frequency, when the terror becomes so pervasive that it transcends description, the mind often encounters a strange reset switch. It recognizes the futility of fighting the beat itself. The attempt to force the heart rate down, the desperate counting of breaths, these efforts were revealed as equally futile, adding a layer of cognitive distress to the physical panic. The open loop, the burning question that had plagued every anxious moment preceding this peak, was why? Why this unbearable sensitivity? Why did the nervous system react to perceived stress with the ferocity reserved for confronting a saber-toothed tiger? The answer, elusive until this very moment of maximum pressure, began to surface not through analysis, but through sheer exhaustion. The physical intensity was draining, yes, but the internal struggle against the feeling was the true source of fatigue. The system was fighting its own defense mechanism. The development of the narrative required a catastrophic interruption, a pattern break from the escalating panic. And the interruption came not from an external source, but from a radical shift in perspective. The body, lying motionless, felt the vibration of the heart against the ribs. This vibration was raw, unmediated life force. It was energy. It was commitment. This was the great, terrifying truth. The heart was racing not because of an impending threat that was definitively going to end everything, but because it had been activated for the massive undertaking of change. The body was preparing for battle, but the self had misinterpreted the preparation as the battle itself. The racing heart was the sound of the engine turning over, fully primed, roaring with anticipation, only to find the vehicle trapped in neutral. The noise was unbearable because the immense power was being generated without an outlet. The fear was energy with nowhere to go but inward, forcing the self into a violent internal feedback loop. This realization, a slow dawning amidst the cacophony, began to redefine the sound. The terror of the beat morphed subtly, agonizingly slowly, into the acknowledgement of a profound, undeniable readiness. The heart was a magnificent machine, operating flawlessly, perhaps even too well. It had heard the signal of the soul, the signal that stagnation was over, that something monumental was required, and it had responded with the maximum possible output. The re-engagement, the second hook meant to pull the protagonist back from the abyss of passive victimhood, arrived with clarity. The sound of your racing heart is not a warning of impending doom. It is the definitive roar of an engine that has finally been unlocked for the journey ahead. It is the announcement that dormancy is over. This pivot point allowed the mind to take the smallest, most crucial step, to cease fighting the physical sensation. When the internal battle against the physiological response stops, the second layer of tension, the fear of the fear, begins to dissolve. This was not the achievement of instantaneous calm. That was a fictional ideal. This was the achievement of acceptance. The heart continued its frantic beat, but the emotional interpretation of that beat shifted from "I am dying" to "I am prepared." The climax unfurled in a cascade of internal liberation. If the heart was merely responding to the magnitude of the task, then the task itself was worthy of this colossal, overwhelming physical commitment. The magnitude of the anxiety was directly proportional to the magnitude of the potential reward, the necessary change, or the depth of the commitment required. The fear was merely the shadow cast by the immense light of necessity. The loops, the persistent questions about identity and weakness, began to close simultaneously. The anxious person is often categorized as fragile, incapable, paralyzed. But the sheer volume of energy being generated proved the opposite. To sustain a panic attack is an act of profound physiological strength. It requires massive energy expenditure. It is the body saying, "I can run a marathon right now, if you just give me a direction." The revelation was this: the terror was not a sign of failure, but a sign of importance. The heart races because the moment matters. It races because the stakes are high enough to warrant this level of internal mobilization. To despise the racing heart was to despise the intensity of one's own life, the importance of one's own decisions. With this acceptance, the protagonist found the capacity to channel the energy, to finally slip the internal machinery out of neutral and into drive. The objective outside, the choice, the confrontation, the next step, did not change. It remained formidable. But the subjective experience of facing it was utterly transformed. The adrenaline, formerly a poison, became fuel. The rigid tension in the muscles became readiness. The focus shifted entirely from the internal sound to the external action. The heart could beat at 200 beats per minute, but the hand could still reach out. The mind could still articulate the truth. The feet could still take the necessary step forward. The terrifying truth was that action was not contingent upon calm. Calm was contingent upon action. The conclusion was definitive, absolute, and immediate in its payoff. Even as the heart continued to recalibrate its rhythm, there was no instant, gentle fade out to a serene 70 beats per minute. That would be a lie. Instead, there was a gradual, almost imperceptible deceleration, the machine finding its cruising speed only once the load was engaged. The initial frantic, fearful hammering slowed into a powerful, steady thumping, the rhythm of deliberate movement. The exhaustion that settled in was not the fatigue of defeat, but the deep, satisfying weariness of having used immense energy efficiently. The metallic taste receded, replaced by the cool clarity of reality. The immediate external pressure had either been met or dissolved under the weight of this newly channeled internal power. The crisis was not averted by avoiding it, but by fully embracing the energy it generated. To those who feel their hearts racing now, who are caught in that terrifying sound-filled vacuum of self-doubt and heightened anxiety, hear these final words: stop fighting the engine. Your body is not breaking, it is mobilizing. The sheer power you are generating is proof of your capacity. You are not defined by the fear itself, but by the magnitude of the response your system can muster. This internal roar is the sound of life demanding a change, demanding movement, demanding a higher expression of yourself. Do not seek to extinguish the fire, seek to aim the flame. Let the fear be the engine, not the anchor. Let the panic be the announcement, not the diagnosis. Every beat is a moment of power, a second of mobilized energy waiting for direction. Your specific call to action, the single definitive instruction that cuts through the lingering fog of apprehension, is this. With that terrifying, magnificent rhythm still pounding in your chest, choose the smallest possible immediate step forward that utilizes that energy. Do not wait for silence, do not wait for tranquility. Act in defiance of the perceived chaos. Move right now exactly as you are with your heart racing, and watch as the engine of your own fear carries you through the very obstacle it was designed to warn you about.